The announcement trailer for Cyberpunk 2077 came out 7 years ago, and the hype for this game finally releasing has been pretty intense for a while now. Something that CD Projekt Red has absolutely leaned into with one of the biggest marketing campaigns I've ever seen for a video game. I mean, seriously, there's been trailer after trailer and 5 different 20+ minute behind the scenes specials, billboards and bus advertisements, and all manner of marketing material. I think the last time I saw a marketing campaign this big was for the Avengers Infinity War and Endgame movies. And it obviously paid off for them, literally, considering that Cyberpunk sold 8 million copies in pre-orders alone and has now sold an additional 5 million non-pre-ordered copies, bringing its total sales figures as of the writing of the script up to 13 million in less than a month. So it sold well, but how is the actual game? Well, it's a real mixed bag. What the game does right, it does really right, but what it does wrong, oh boy, it definitely doesn't get right. I played Cyberpunk 2077 on PC for one full playthrough on normal difficulty, and a handful of hours of a second playthrough also on normal difficulty, around 46 hours in total. There will be light story spoilers in this video, but nothing that wasn't revealed in a trailer. You have been warned. My PC has an AMD Ryzen 5 3600X CPU and an NVIDIA 1660 Ti graphics card. It's not the latest top-of-the-line setup, but it's pretty decent. I can run Cyberpunk on ultra settings at 30 FPS without ray tracing when I wasn't recording. I did turn on ray tracing once just to see what would happen, and my computer was like, no, and I was getting like 5 frames per second, so I turned it off pretty quickly. But I have seen footage of the game running at max settings and it looks incredible. But that's not what my hardware can do, and I personally prefer to prioritize frame rate over graphical fidelity, so I played like 99% of the game somewhere in between medium to high graphic settings at 60 frames per second. And even on medium settings, the game still looks pretty damn good. The game's world is truly an impressive sight. Walking through the streets of Night City was a captivating experience. But it's not just all neon lights and bright colors, there are several districts in the city with their own distinct style. Pacifica, for instance, does not look at all like Japantown. And there's also the Badlands, which exist outside the city, which is a bigger than I anticipated desert landscape that you can explore. The aesthetic of the world really drew me in. It's just so realized in its vision, from the clothes that characters wear to the vehicles that you can drive to the way cyberware looks and all the advertisements you see in game. The game has a very strong and unique visual identity that I enjoyed very much. Character models are well detailed with some impressive animations for conversation scenes, but animation transitions outside of conversations are pretty obvious and janky looking, like you'll be watching characters following their pathing using their walking animations, and then they'll hit the right spot and suddenly start their pre-canned animations and the transition isn't handled super well. The UI isn't spectacular either, with a pretty clunky setup that is confusing to get a grip on, with menus within menus within menus and a color scheme that doesn't do it any favors either. And the game has a ton of pop-in when you're driving around the world, maybe the most noticeable pop-in I've seen in a game in a while, like it's pretty in your face and it's definitely distracting. The soundtrack and score for this game are both fantastic. I'm not a big fan of electronic music generally, but the sound that the composers and artists have managed to capture here is one that's full of raw energy that my metalhead taste in music really appreciates. Lots of synths, lots of guitars, lots of drums, and some really in-your-face tracks. But there's also music with tension and suspense, as well as sorrow and beauty. The score, much like the characters and story, isn't one note, and it flows and shifts appropriately to whatever the situation calls for, whether it be a firefight or something more calm and intimate. The sound design is pretty good overall. There were some moments where the in-world music was way too loud and I had to lower the music volume in the settings, but there's lots of good audio cues that are instantly recognizable, like the ringtone when you get calls or the audio sting when you complete a mission. Guns sound great, cars sound great, and characters sound great. However, there are also instances that are less than stellar, but I can't tell if that's because the audio design wasn't finished or something, or if it's just because of a glitch or bug preventing the sound from playing properly. Which brings me to the absolute hands down worst part of the game, the technical issues, bugs, and glitches. I'm sure you've heard by now, but Cyberpunk 2077 was not ready to be released just yet. I think this might be the most buggy AAA game I have ever played. Here are some of the glitches I personally encountered, and this isn't even a complete list, as there are some glitches I just didn't bother writing down, and there are many other glitches that other players have reported that I might not have encountered in my own playthrough. Sometimes when characters are speaking, their lips don't move, or there will be no audio playing or subtitles, so you just have to accept that you missed a piece of the conversation. Sometimes you'll get multiple phone calls playing at the same time. One time the game played two identical music tracks on top of each other a few seconds apart, and audio filters won't be applied properly, so there were many instances where a character will be talking on the phone and they won't have the phone audio filter applied, or sometimes characters you're talking face to face with will have the phone filter on. And these are only the audio glitches. There are many more bugs. One time the camera got stuck outside a building I was in after I had exited a brain dance section. There are lots of objects that will float in the air like guns or cigarettes. One time the clothes my character was wearing were showing up in my FOV. Sometimes when you're driving, V will T-pose through the car and V's hair disappeared during multiple situations. After completing a quest, a character gave me the keys to their apartment because they were leaving town. So I went to check out the apartment only to find them standing there. I began talking to them and they mentioned how it was lucky that I called them while they were driving, meaning the character was actually supposed to not be there. One NPC was phase shifting in and out of reality in an elevator, which prevented me from continuing. Jackie's AI broke and prevented me from continuing. Various overlays like subtitles or notifications would sometimes remain on screen when they weren't supposed to. One time when I summoned my car, it just drove over thin air to get to me without falling, and NPCs will go through objects regularly. Now, as my playthrough with Cyberpunk continued, there were more patches added to the game, so the further I got into the game, the less bugs I had as the patches were released. But I still got a few bugs late game as well, so there are still lots of things to iron out. The first trailer ever released for Cyberpunk ended with CD Projekt Red saying that the game will come out when it's ready. Well, the game came out, but it wasn't ready. Curiously enough, even though I had to reload saves and restart the game quite a few times, it never crashed on me, not once. The same can't be said for the console versions of the game though. To put it simply, the PS4 and Xbox One versions of Cyberpunk, the last gen versions, should have been scrapped completely. They are basically unplayable. From everything I've seen, they crash constantly, the visuals are unbelievably downgraded, and the frame rate is a fucking joke. And CD Projekt Red knew this. That's why they didn't give out any review codes for the consoles. Reviewers were only provided with the PC version of the game, as well as being limited to only showing footage that was provided for them. Yeah, you heard that right. Reviewers who accepted the review codes could not show their own fucking footage. You know, the footage that would have shown off how fucking broken the game was. I gave The Last of Us Part 2 shit for having what I felt to be unnecessarily strict restrictions for reviewers, i.e. they couldn't show or even talk about anything relating to Abby's parts of the game. But Cyberpunk's 2077 restrictions are laughable. They are the worst review restrictions I have ever heard of, period. You play as V, a mercenary who's trying to become a legend in Night City. After starting a partnership with a fellow merc named Jackie Wells, you get contacted by a big-time fixer named Dexter Deshawn, who has a big-time job for you. Fixers are sort of like the middlemen in Night City that connect clients with the people who can fix their problems. He tasks you with stealing a piece of tech from Arasaka Tower, the biggest and baddest corporation in the game's world. As these sorts of things tend to go, the job was a disaster and V winds up with a biochip of Johnny Silverhand, a long-dead rocker boy terrorist, in his head. The chip is slowly killing V, so the story will see you trying to figure out a way to remove the chip and save V's life. I enjoyed the story of Cyberpunk 2077 a lot. It was really good as a result of multiple factors. Firstly, the writing was pretty fucking great. It's not the absolute best of the best writing I've ever seen, like it's not Red Dead 2 or the first Last of Us level of writing, but it's pretty close. If it's not the highest tier of video game writing, it's definitely in the tier directly below it. The voice acting is consistently excellent across the board, although I wasn't the biggest fan of female V's voice. She wasn't acted badly per se, but I do feel like it's not up to par with the rest of the cast. If you've been paying attention to anything related to Cyberpunk, you'll know that Keanu Reeves is voicing Johnny Silverhand. Now listen, I like Keanu Reeves as much as the next guy, but we have to admit he's not exactly the best actor out there. there. Even still, I don't really care. I love a lot of his movies and I thoroughly enjoyed his portrayal of Johnny Silverhand. The characters were fantastic. Judy, Panam, River, Carrie, Takamura, Jackie, all the characters in the game feel real and fleshed out, and going on their quests and getting to know them were honestly the highlights of the game for me. I especially liked the dynamic between Johnny and V that develops and changes over the course of the game. After the prologue, Johnny is with you for the rest of the game. If you've ever played Batman Arkham Knight, Johnny is basically this game's version of the Joker, a character that is always there, commenting on almost every interaction or conversation you have, standing to the side or sitting in a corner ready to chip in even when his opinion isn't exactly wanted. Johnny begins the game as a fucking asshole who doesn't give a shit about V or helping them stay alive. You also get a few flashback sequences where V gets to relive Johnny's memories, which show just how narcissistic, violent, uncaring, and misogynistic Johnny really is. But the game keeps track of your relationship with Johnny, and depending on how certain conversations with him go, and whether or not you complete specific side quests, Johnny can actually go through a pretty meaningful and powerful character arc, culminating in one potential ending which I found to be pretty emotional. V, however, is a different story. I never really cared about V the same way I cared about many of the other characters. Part of that is because I don't connect with V's goal of becoming a legend of Night City. I was never given a reason to. Once you pass the opening of the game, determined by which life path you chose, which all only take around 20 minutes each, you're treated to a montage of V and Jackie starting out their partnership and quickly see them complete a few jobs and move up in the world of Night City. Also, while I liked Jackie, he's not around long enough for his death to have the impact I think CD Projekt Red were hoping it would. Compare the beginning of 2077 to the beginning of a game like Grand Theft Auto 4. The first time we see Nico, the player character, he is literally fresh off the boat, taking his first steps in America. He, and by extension the player, start off with nothing, and we are with Nico every step of the way as he slowly builds up his reputation, career, and fortune. We completely skip this first step with V, and I feel like it's a pretty big missed opportunity. Another missed opportunity are the life paths themselves, which are essentially pointless. You can pick from one of 3 different options: Nomad, Street Kid, or Corpo, but all these boil down to is which 20-minute opening you get to play. There are certain dialogue options that are only available to specific life paths, but almost all of them don't actually affect the story or outcomes of quests at all. Interestingly, we can see from the first E3 reveal trailer that there were originally going to be more options for your character's background, at the very least allowing you to choose from 3 different aspects of your character's history, like who their childhood hero was, a key life event, and why they came to Night City. It seems like this system ultimately got condensed into just picking a life path. Another potential issue with the game is that your choices don't really matter all that much. Aside from the ending decision you make and the life path openings, most of the game will play out pretty much the same. Earlier in the year I played Wasteland 3, which is another RPG that was quite buggy, but it might be the most impressive RPG I've ever played in terms of how much impact your choices can have on the story and the game world. Nothing happens in a vacuum in Wasteland 3. Almost all your choices have this rippling effect that impacts multiple other quests, areas, and factions in the game. Cyberpunk's world by comparison is much less malleable, which I admit isn't necessarily a bad thing, it just depends on what you're going for. Like the Mass Effect trilogy is my favorite trilogy in gaming, but as each game came out, they were less and less like true RPGs and events happened more linearly. But Cyberpunk has always been marketed as a true RPG where your choices matter and will change the way the story unfolds, and that's just not really the case. I played Cyberpunk 2077 on mouse and keyboard for my entire playthrough because my controllers just wouldn't work properly with the game. I was getting lag, input delays, and all manner of bullshit while using my Xbox One controller, so I tried messing with the controller settings in the menu, even copying other people's settings that they shared to get it to work. It didn't. Then I changed to my second controller and had the same problem, so to test if it was my Bluetooth connection that was the issue, I booted up Alan Wake, my favorite game of all time, a game that I know like the back of my hand, and my controller was working perfectly, so it is absolutely an issue with the game itself. Most of your time spent playing Cyberpunk will be either in conversation, driving around the city, or in combat encounters. Driving isn't great. Cars feel pretty slippery and loose, and driving for the first few hours of the game can be a pretty frustrating experience. I eventually got used to the driving and even began to have fun with it, but that was in spite of the mechanics, not because of them. But once I had access to motorcycles, I mainly stuck to them since they actually control better than cars do. Speaking of cars, all the fictional brands that exist in the game and the incredible car designs are really cool, but unfortunately you can't customize your vehicles, which is kind of a missed opportunity since there's so much potential for creating really fucking cool Cyberpunk cars here. There have been mixed opinions on the gunplay in Cyberpunk, but personally I thought it was really good. I mean, I wouldn't compare it to a dedicated first-person shooter like Doom or Call of Duty or something, but it's definitely the best shooting I've ever played in an RPG. And when you combine the shooting with some of the cyberware you can acquire, like a double jump and a dodge that slows down time, it feels damn good to play. The game is more like a looter shooter than I thought it would be. Oftentimes I almost felt like I was playing Borderlands with the sheer volume of different guns that enemies would drop. This amount of loot actually kind of worked against some of the other mechanics and systems in the game, unfortunately. The only stat on a gun that matters is the DPS. The higher it is, the better it is. You can mod your weapons with different scopes and silencers, but you switch out guns so frequently because you constantly get guns with higher DPS that modding guns was just a waste of time. The game also has a crafting system which you can use to craft weapons, but I never used it since again I never really saw the point of using it when I would probably just pick up another gun better than the one I crafted after the next firefight. The guns themselves, however, are awesome. There are 3 different types of guns. Smart weapons, which use homing technology to lock onto enemies so your bullets track them. Smart weapons were my personal favorite. Tech weapons, which allow you to charge up your shots and shoot through walls. And power weapons, which allow you to ricochet your bullets off of surfaces. There is melee combat in the game, but I wanted to stick to guns for my main playthrough, so I barely ever used it. What little melee combat I did do felt kind of janky, as melee combat tends to feel in first-person games. There's also a dodge mechanic in the game which works fine, but it's mapped by default to quickly double tapping a direction on the keyboard, which is something you'll do regularly as you play just to adjust your character. So there were many moments when I was either stealthing or in a combat situation where I activated a dodge without meaning to, which could be quite frustrating. And the game doesn't let you remap the dodge mechanic to a dedicated dodge key for some fucking reason. While we're speaking about odd choices in regards to button mapping and movement options, for some reason the C button is used by default for both crouching and skipping conversations. So there were many times where I would somehow be crouched during a conversation but was unable to stand up because it would skip the line being said and I didn't want to miss anything. It's not a big deal per se, but it's just a bizarre oversight. Quick hacking allows you to hack into enemy systems to control cameras or disable security, or even hack into enemies themselves. Cyberdecks control how many different types of quick hacks you have and how many times you can use a quick hack. There are hacks that allow you to temporarily blind enemies, deal damage to them, or even set them on fire. It can be a very useful tool when stealthing, but I found that using quick hacks during combat wasn't really worth it, as each hack takes a few seconds to apply on a target, meaning that by the time a hack's effect was activating, I could have already killed the enemy by shooting him. The stealth works alright. It's definitely your bog standard type of stealth mechanics you'd expect from your average action-adventure type of game. You can walk up behind enemies who all have indicators above their head that tell you if they're detecting you, and you can grab them from behind to either kill them or take them down non-lethally, and even drag the bodies around and hide them in containers. It's not deep or special, but it works fine. Cyberware can give your character all types of really cool abilities and stats, like the aforementioned double jump ability and bullet time dodge. There are also things like rocket launchers from your arms and the mantis blades, and buffs and effects like increased resistances to various damage types. Unfortunately, Cyberware highlights another issue with the game, which is its monetary economy. A lot of the things you can buy in Cyberpunk cost way too much compared to how much money you earn from doing missions. There are also some main and side missions that require a large amount of money to complete, and there's even an entire category of side quests that is just about buying vehicles. No joke. The game's quests are split into 4 different categories. categories: main jobs, side jobs, gigs, and rides. The main jobs and the side jobs are the absolute highlight of the game for me, with some really great missions and stories that were both very intriguing and genuinely heartfelt. Gigs are smaller and shorter, one-and-done type of missions where you'll get contacted by a fixer depending on where you are in Night City and be given a task to complete. I didn't do that many gigs during my playthrough, not because they were lackluster or anything, it was just that I found the main and side missions to be so enthralling and engaging that I didn't really want to stop playing them. And the rides category are the previously mentioned car buying quests. There are two different levels for your character, their actual level and your street cred. Your level works like any other RPG. Once you gain enough XP, you level up and get points to spend on attributes and perks. Your street cred, however, is tied to your reputation in Night City and increases as you complete jobs and other activities. As your street cred increases, you will gain access to better gear at stores and new gigs will be made available to you. The RPG build mechanics also include your attributes, skills, and perks. There are 5 attributes: intelligence, body, reflexes, technical ability, and cool. And each attribute has a number of skills associated with it. Intelligence has breach protocol and quick hacking. Body has athletics, annihilation, and street brawler. Reflexes has handguns, blades, and assault. Technical ability has crafting and engineering, and cool has stealth and cold blood. Each attribute point you spend to level up an attribute will give you broad overall bonuses to stats and effects, and skills level up the more you use them and also give you rewards. Whenever you level up a skill, you are given perk points, which can be then spent to unlock perks which will unlock more specific upgrades for your use. But perk points aren't tied to the skills you use to get them. If you gained a perk point by leveling up your handguns, for instance, you don't have to spend it on a handgun perk, you can spend it on any skill you want. There are a ton of different perks to unlock, with lots of opportunities to create different builds on multiple playthroughs. I kind of played a jack of all trades character with a focus on stealth and guns, but I can see how someone can build a completely different character from mine. There are a few more things to talk about before closing out this review, so let's try and get through them in no particular order. Some of the marketing materials showed off the various types of fashion at play in Night City, and I do really like the looks that have been created and the 4 different types of dress that denizens of Night City partake in. It's just a shame that it has no bearing on the player whatsoever. You can choose what kind of pants to wear or shirt or hat, but every piece of clothing that you wear has an armor stat, so there's no reason to wear an article of clothing with a lower stat. You'd think that there'd be some sort of system which would allow you to transfer stats from one item to another. You'd think that, but there isn't. So for a good couple of hours, my male V was rocking a purple bra underneath his jacket because it had the best stats of any inner torso item I had, and I can assure you I wasn't going for that look. As I made my way through Night City over the course of my playthrough, I realized something about the city. There was almost nothing to do in it aside from the jobs. There are only 2 different activities outside of side missions that you can engage in, one of them being soliciting a joy toy, aka prostitute, and engaging in an NCPD random crime encounter, which are just combat encounters around the city. For all its beauty and detail, Night City feels devoid of content. Compare Night City to GTA 5's Los Santos, a game that came out 7 years before Cyberpunk. GTA 5's world has so many things to do in it. You can go golfing, play tennis, go hunting, watch movies, ride a Ferris wheel or roller coaster, customize cars, solicit prostitutes, get lap dances, play darts and more, and of course cause a ridiculous amount of mayhem and carnage by just blowing shit up and running away from the cops by engaging with the game's wanted system. Still, Cyberpunk has always been described as an RPG first, and I never really faulted other open world RPGs like The Outer Worlds or Fallout for not having that many side activities to engage in. However, I do feel like Cyberpunk was probably supposed to have more shit to do in the world, and the wanted system is a bit of an indicator of that. Which, by the way, is hands down the worst wanted system that I have ever seen in a video game. Police will literally spawn 10 feet away from you no matter where you are and will either kill you immediately with overwhelming force or just give up chasing you after a few seconds. Those nail-bitingly intense police chases present in the GTA games are not present here. Cyberpunk 2077 is a difficult game to sum up because it has many issues, but I still really liked it a lot. And at the end of the day, why do we play games? Because we enjoy them in whatever capacity that means to you. At least that's why I fucking play games. And that's why the biggest factor that goes into determining whether or not I recommend a game and what I ultimately rate it is how much I actually enjoyed the game. It's not the only factor, but it is the most important. And I personally think that's the best way to review games, because otherwise what's the alternative? Just review games as if our personal experience with them doesn't matter? If I did that, my review of The Last of Us Part 2 would have been very different. It's a technical marvel, an achievement in gaming unlike any other. 9 out of 10. I fucking hated it, don't play it. It doesn't make any sense to me to review games that way. Cyberpunk's world is incredibly well realized, with an incredible soundtrack, story, and cast of characters that I won't soon forget, as well as great gunplay and RPG gameplay mechanics. But despite how much I liked Cyberpunk, there is no denying the numerous disappointments with some of its systems and cut content, and most severely the inexcusable state that the game launched in, and the large amount of bugs that still remain even after multiple patches. In my review of Wasteland 3, I gave it an 8.5 out of 10, and said that the only reason it isn't getting a higher score is because of the technical issues with the game. And I think the same thing is true for Cyberpunk. But Cyberpunk has many more technical issues than Wasteland 3. So the final score for Cyberpunk is a difficult decision, but I think I'm going to give Cyberpunk 2077 a 7.5 out of 10. The PC version anyways. As I mentioned earlier, don't buy the last gen versions. Just don't do it. Those would get like a 3 out of 10. Well, that happened. I hope CD Projekt Red continues to work on the game and dole out patches and the promised free DLC, but I think it's going to take a while for the reputation to recover, if it ever does. The next videos will be my top 5 games of 2020 and the top 10 games of the Xbox One and PS4 console generation. So if you like unimportant lists about video games, well, I got you covered. If you liked this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and commenting your thoughts on the game. Thanks for watching.